Hi, I'm Igor Volsky.
I'm Michelle Jawando.
And welcome back to Thinking Cap. Michelle, this week we're talking to Al Franken, who's now the second-term senator from Minnesota. He has a new memoir out called Al Franken, Giant of the Senate.
For those who don't know, he's the U.S. Senator from Minnesota. He's a former writer, performer on Saturday Night Live, actor, comedian. And this should be so interesting because in recent weeks, he's really catapulted to, I think, a broader audience with his questioning with Attorney General Jeff Sessions and really forceful questioning about his role and conversations that AG Sessions may have had with the Russians. And I know, Igor, you know these conversations with the Russians too.
Hey, now.
But it should be interesting to kind of just ask him and engage with him about this crazy moment in our politics. Could he have written about what's happening right now when he was back on Saturday Night Live?
Oh, that's a good question, Michelle.
Oh, thank you.
And by the way, the only questions, the only conversations I have with Russians are with my parents.
That's
okay,
right.
Just for the record, so that we're clear. My favorite Russians.
Those are my now favorite Russians,
oh, good.
too, though.
You know, the Al Franken you described is not the Al Franken who first came to the Senate, because when he finally won his recount in 2008, 2009, whenever that was, he became senator by just a handful of votes. And so he came in with this attitude of, I gotta work really hard, I can't make jokes, I can't be flashy in order to win the next election. And so it's now incredibly refreshing, really, to see him do a funny book about his life, to see him do interviews with national outlets. It's almost like he's been freed and can now be the Al Franken that many of us grew up watching on Saturday Night Live, reading his books.
Well, I didn't grow up watching Saturday Night Live, but I was there when he first entered into the Senate. And so I knew he was a comedian, but I don't think I understood how big he was, quote unquote, in that world. And when he came into the Senate, he was very serious. I mean, he was dogged about the kind of minutia of the bills that if you wanted him to sign on, he was involved in every detail. And so there was a respect that he gained from kind of senior statesmen in the party. Everyone on his staff was super smart and intelligent because he was serious about what work quality he was putting out. So it's interesting now to know more about him and to see what his career has been and being able to weave both, I think, this mastery of how we legislate, but also using his personality to push the conversation forward. So it should be really good.
It's interesting to hear you say that because in this book, he talks about how difficult it was for him to be serious during the campaign, how he got into so much trouble early on by making jokes, and his campaign team really had to restrain him and say, you cannot make jokes, you have to be serious. They told him, we're trying to push this narrative that you're a serious person. And so he writes about how he had to talk about how he went to Harvard, how he wrote 6 books. This is something they had to emphasize over and over again to kind of squeeze the funny out of him. And the campaign was also dominated. This is his first campaign in 2008. Norm Coleman, who was the sitting senator, took every joke that Al did that had some kind of controversy behind it and put it through what Al in the book calls the dehumorizer, stripped it of any context, and presented it as this is what Al Franken really believed. So I think that really shaped him as a first-term senator, where he, must have gone completely in the opposite direction and really focused on being very serious.
When we think now, how many people elected President Trump because they said he was authentic and he was himself, and we don't expect him to know every detail, but we just because he's a real person. So it's so funny to just think about how a few years ago, being all of who you are was a recipe for attack ads, and now it's something we praise in politics. So this business, this work is so crazy. It makes
changes almost every cycle.
Totally does.
Well, so here's our conversation with Al Franken, Giant of the Senate. So thank you so much for joining us here on Thinking Cap. First of all, congratulations on the book.
Well, thank you.
It's a fun, easy read.
Thank you.
Enjoying it immensely. And I wanted to start by asking you, you've built an entire kind of first half of your career on political satire, on reporting on politics through your radio show, and I'm wondering, now that you're actually a senator, you're part of the system, what do you feel you got wrong about politics, or you wish you would have known about then that you know now?
Wow, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer right off. One thing I was struck with when I got to the Senate was how little debate there is, how little actual debate there is on the floor. But I'm not sure what I would have done with that as either in comedy or in my radio show. You know,
But in terms of like what motivates senators, why they act the way they act, that you feel we're able to capture as outsiders, that what we see projected at us is what actually happens.
you know, that you represent your state. One thing I think that people don't really understand is how state-centric you are.
So in your time since you've been in the Senate, I personally love the Senate. I loved my time there. I thought it was just a crazy place to work. But I find myself thinking now that you probably could not write a story about how dysfunctional, even over the last 5 years, things have become. And I wonder, as you look back in your career and you think about political satire, what would your 14 years ago self say about this moment that we're living in now?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, that's when I wrote Lies and Lying Liars Who Tell Them a Fair and Balanced Look at the Right. And that was really about Fox. I mean, to a large degree about Fox. It's hence a fair and balanced look at the right, and that's I think that's why they sued me because of the subtitle and
which
O'Reilly
they've now changed.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? They could have saved themselves a lot of trouble. That was just really, you know, it was O'Reilly basically was mad at me and because he was on the cover of the book and I had a difficult for him chapter. But it was a misunderstanding because he didn't understand that satire is protected speech even when the object of the satire doesn't get it. So it was just that simple. Arianna Huffington, because he sued, I think we sold 1 million copies of the book. She said, it's as if Bill O'Reilly walked up to you and handed you a check for $1 million. So that was then.
Let me ask you about the Lying Liars era. You know, you write in the book that once it came out, people came up to you and were like, oh, thank you so much for exposing them, for kind of going point by point.
I think it's actually kind of adorable that
yeah.
There was a period where you could, you know, sell a lot of books based on just pointing out that people in the media lie. And that politicians lie. And now, you know, now it's like,
Take your pick.
Well, Trump is president and he got there. He paid no penalty for being pointed out that he was lying.
Yeah. And as you think of the formation of Fox News, the role of Limbaugh and O'Reilly and Hannity and all these guys over the years, what role do you think they played in getting Trump elected?
I think they played a significant role. I think that this alternate universe, this alternate facts universe, came about because of, I wrote Rush Limbaugh as a big fat idiot and other observations in, I guess, 1995. But there is this, people have self-segmented and get their information. You know, since both of those we have the internet, and just so people go to seek out information that confirms their own bias. That's a problem. And that's why I think there's still, you know, a lot of people ask me, why are these people sticking with Trump? And it's because they're still getting their information from Sean Hannity, and they're still getting their information from Breitbart, and that's what they seek out because that confirms what they believe. And I think people self-segment by who they hang out with and who they talk to and what church they go to, etc. So it's a different time now than it was, and I think that is a big part of what made helped Trump win. And, you know, and I also go back to Rush and the books that I wrote and try to trace that back, and also look at the 2004 election, what happened after that, as a hopeful sign. After 2004, we were all incredibly dejected. None of us liked Bush. We thought Kerry had a really good chance of winning. He didn't win. I don't think we thought he was a lock like we thought Hillary was. But then Cap came along, and Media Matters, and Air America, and we fought back. Bush tried to do Social Security privatization. We fought that. We won. We're in a different time now than we were in 2005. But there is, if people work and work smart, we can do that again.
You get back there. You know, you talk about bipartisanship in the book, and you talk about how it is much harder to be friends with people who are not like you.
You can be friendly. It's easy to be friendly.
Right. But it takes more work because you're fighting on different values, but it takes more work to do that.
Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, it's easy to be friendly with people with a good sense of humor. I mean, Lindsey Graham is someone who's easy to be friendly with. Yeah. And there were some that are harder. Tom Coburn, that was a hilarious portion of your book. That sounded like the most awkward breakfast ever. I'll tell the story.
Tell the story.
Basically, most of my colleagues right away, my Republican colleagues, got it. They were a little wary of me when I came because I had used so much of my comedy to heap scorn and ridicule on Republicans. But I get to the Senate, and it didn't take long for them to get it. I get it. He's funny, and he likes to laugh a lot. That's why he went into comedy. You know, Lindsey has a great sense of humor. When he was like 16th out of 17 in the 2016 primaries, I said, Lindsey, if I were voting in the Republican primaries, I'd vote for you. And he said, without hesitation, he just said, that's my problem. So I get most of my colleagues, not most of them, but a lot of them have a very good sense of humor, and all of them have some sense of humor, except for Coburn. My first 4 or 5 interactions with him were just misses, complete misses. So I went up to him and I said, Tom, can I take you to lunch? And he said, tell you what, take me to breakfast. So I said, okay. So we go to breakfast a couple days later. About 8 in the morning, we sit down. I said, look, Tom, for the next 40, 45 minutes, whatever it is, let's just have fun, okay? And he goes like, okay, fun. And I said, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. We can talk about politics. We can talk about our families. We can talk about our careers. He said, but let's have fun. He said, okay. So I said, well, careers. Now, you're an obstetrician gynecologist. Let me ask you something. To be a doctor in Oklahoma, do you have to have any formal education? And he just says, yes, you've got to go to medical school. And I said, well, okay, Tom, that was a joke.
That was a joke.
And that's what I used to do, you see, in my career. So then we continued the breakfast, and I taught him what jokes were and what the proper reaction to jokes were.
The laugh after the...
Yeah, and then he wrote me a note. We got a note later that afternoon saying I had a lot of fun. Consistent with kind of courtesy of the Senate, I checked with all my colleagues who I wrote stories about, which were private conversations, if in any way they might look bad. I did that with everyone but Cruz. And so I called, Tom has retired, so I called him in Oklahoma, and I said, hi, Tom. I said, oh, how you doing now? I'm doing good. I'm writing this book, and I just remember that breakfast we had. I said, well, okay, I'm writing this book, and I want to write that story in the book. Would that be okay with you? And he said, we have a First Amendment. You can write anything you want.
Well, Let me, you mentioned that senators are more driven by state interests than maybe we realize just from the outside in. But when you think of something like this healthcare bill...
First of all, I think we believe healthcare is a right. And I also think that we believe that in the vicissitudes of life, as FDR said about Social Security, that there are certain things that the government can and should do for people to provide a safety net and for something bad happens to them. And in healthcare, that means programs like Medicaid and Medicare. They're successful programs. And this bill was nothing more than a tax cut for people at the top end, and to pay for it, they were cutting Medicaid, a huge cut of Medicaid that would really hurt people who are vulnerable. And we're talking working people, working poor, and we're talking about seniors, and we're talking about people who are disabled. And there's no question about it. Those are the people to be hurt. There are other aspects of it, too, that were very dangerous. Allowing waivers so that states could no longer offer the 10 essential health benefits. So they no longer had to do that. That insurers could. Once you start down that road, then you're not protecting people with pre-existing conditions. I'm a big fan of Atul Gawande. He's actually written in this week's New Yorker a piece I think is very important about the studies that show that if you're insured, you get the kind of steady care. It's not about the spectacular emergency or operation or something like that. It's about getting regular health care that really makes a difference in people's health. And that he is an author or co-author of a survey of studies, and it basically says that Medicaid works as well, if not better, than private health insurance. For every 300 to 800 people, it saves a life. This is literally, about lots and lots of people's lives. We had an event in Minnesota this past weekend. We had a forum, some very moving stories. A young man who spoke, Brandon, 17 years old. He was born very prematurely. He weighed a little over a pound. And his parents' wedding ring fit over his arm. And he was taken to Mayo. He was born in the Twin Cities. They took him down to Mayo, and Mayo said, "We can't. This is too complex for us." And they sent him back to the Twin Cities, where he went to Gillette Children's Hospital, which is a great hospital. And they saved his life. And but he's had 38 surgeries. He
busted the cap his first 2 weeks of life.
Oh, the first day.
Yeah.
The first 24 hours were more than $1 million. And what was crazy is, he had hydrocephalus. So he's got a shunt now. He had that. He had cerebral palsy. He's had to have surgery on his feet and legs, and he couldn't turn over until he was 3 or something. But he walked with a walker. He just took his first college course. I told him at the end of all this, I said, you're the person here that I'm least worried about. He's the most resilient guy. He's also kind of funny. And he's going to do great. But he wouldn't be here.
So when Cassidy hears a story like that, what do you think his reaction is? Like, that person would be able to find coverage under my bill, or?
I don't know how they think that would be covered.
Right.
I know how they do it. They basically say, well, kids, disabled kids aren't touched by this. That's what they say. I do know what they say. And the thing is that's true, but if you're cutting
Medicaid, that's not
the state's Medicaid, the state has to figure out how it's going to spend its money. And you don't know if this kid is going to be taken care of. I go all around rural Minnesota, and man, do they hate this thing, this Republican well, the
The
House
Trump
bill and the Trump care. And I think that's unfair to Trump only in the sense that I don't think he knows
what's actually in it. I think that is correct.
But you know, he said, of course.
But you know, he said, "I know it well, and we will have victory." That was his latest tweet. Or something.
Okay, well, I don't think I don't think he always tells the truth. And you know, he said, "I'm not going to cut Medicaid." He said it over and over again. He said that's what separated him from the other candidates. I don't care if it hurts me. I'm not going to cut Medicaid. So that's why if he says I know it well, you shouldn't necessarily just say, "Oh, okay. I guess he knows this really well."
Don't say that. So what's the way back? I think, you know, progressives right now, there's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blame always.
Well, you know, when you're pointing a finger at someone else, there's three fingers pointing back at you. Yeah.
Well, and my grandmother always says, stop talking about lemons, add some sugar, make some lemonade, right? So like,
I don't get it.
You don't get it?
No, I'm joking.
Okay. I was like,
That was
what?
a joke, Michelle?
I know that was a joke. I'm sorry. I'm like Tom.
That was a joke.
I'm Tom Coburn right now. We should make him a new word. But I think there's like the big question, like what do progressives need to do? Where do they start? Where do they begin?
We have to reach out to people who voted for Trump. We have to speak to those people. One thing we can't say and should never say is, I don't know why those people voted against their own interests. They love to hear that. You know that?
Right.
They just love, oh, I see. Thank you for telling me that I don't know what my own interests are. So I think we got to prove to them that we have policies that, whether it be on child care, which is really important to people.
Yes. You got an amen on that one.
You know, we have to tell people that we are for a strong middle class. That's what I write in my book. That's what I kind of start off with. And I start off with that. I grew up in a suburb of Minneapolis. My dad didn't graduate high school. He was a printing salesman. We grew up my brother and I and my parents lived in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. I felt like the luckiest kid in the world, and I was the luckiest kid in the world because I was growing up in America, in Minnesota, in St. Louis Park, at the height of the middle class. And I just felt like I could do anything I wanted to do. That's why I went to a really good college, or graduated from college, and I became a comedian. Because I said, I don't understand why you shouldn't just do what you want to do. And I think there are a lot of people are very mad at the fact that they don't have that for their kids, and that they didn't have it. The pie isn't expanding. The world isn't expanding in the same way for them. And so we've got to be very conscious of the meat and potato issues, and we've got to be show people that we're fighting for them. And also, I'm sorry, but I write about how my wife Franny had a very different story, and hers was that her father, a decorated World War II vet, died in a car accident when she was 18 months old. She had a younger sister, Bootsy, 3 months. Her mom was 29 years old and was widowed with 5 kids, 5. But they all made it. Now, they made it. It was tough. I had a carefree childhood. She had a free childhood. You know, she really started working when she was 9 years old, and all the money went to... Sometimes they went hungry in their house. Often they went hungry. And they had Social Security survivor benefits. My mother-in-law went to work at the grocery store in the produce department. All the girls went to college on combinations of Pell Grants. College affordability is a huge, huge issue. In those days, a full Pell Grant paid for 80% of a public college education. Today it pays for 30 to 35%. And they tell you in this country to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We all believe that. You should do that. But first you got to have the boots. And the federal government gave Franny's family the boots because they needed it because of the vicissitudes of life.
So you think we can get back there again?
I do. But we're not going to do that by telling people that we know better what they need. What you need to do is show up and listen.
Stop talking.
Well, you can also talk, but you can listen more.
Reading your book, it surprised me you writing that President Obama in 2008 would not campaign for you.
That was such a great tidbit.
And I'm curious if you ever got a chance to ask him why not.
I've asked his, very close people close to him. That was not unusual, not campaigning for people. He, I think, for all kinds of reasons, wanted to look above partisan politics. All I wanted him to do was come into the state and just be seen with me. And there were some things where they went overboard. I mean, there was an event that Hillary did in Hibbing, where for some reason I wasn't allowed on the stage, and Hillary and Amy Klobuchar, my senior senator, Jim Oberstar, who was a congressman then and chairman of the Transportation Committee, would point to me in the crowd. Al is going for Senate. He's great. Vote for him. And after this experience of election night in 2016, I just kind of go you know what? The job of the top of the ticket is to win. But I think he was a great president, and I admire him tremendously.
So you were actually good at squash, is what Senator Kirsten Gillibrand told me.
I'm okay at squash.
No. She was on the squash team. She says that you're good. So I want to know top 5 athletes in the Senate right now.
Oh my goodness. Well,
I'll throw you and Senator Gillibrand in the mix. So
she's a good athlete.
She is.
She is a really good athlete.
In top 5?
No, I don't think I don't think I am at all. I think Joe Donnelly, I know, plays on the baseball team. I think Sherrod does too, doesn't he?
Sherrod, I don't know if he did this year, but he
has in the past. The thing is, I play squash. How many senators play squash? I think it's just Kirsten. I've played once with Sheldon, White House, and of course he plays squash.
Of course. He's from Rhode Island. It's the thing.
Well, he's. I went sailing with Sheldon. My first time I ever went sailing.
Of course you would.
And I went. He took me sailing. I started singing the Gilligan's Island theme, and I said, Sheldon, you're so smart. You would have been the professor. And he was insulting. I would have been Thurston Howell. So he's that blue blood.
Yes.
Someone who you probably wouldn't think is a great athlete and now is Orrin Hatch.
Oh, see, that's great.
I don't know. He may have been. All
right. Well, Senator, you have been so gracious. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, I like how gullible you are.
I just believe I'm so corny and nice. I'm like, we can do it. That's why they hire me.
Oh, that's great.
If you've been enjoying the podcast, please go rate us, review us on iTunes or wherever else you listen to your podcast.
And tell your friends, your family, your neighbor, your dog walker, your
dog walker,
favorite librarian, your
grandma. Grandmas listen.
Yeah, anyone who you interact with and listens to podcasts, tell them to subscribe to Thinking Cap.
We would appreciate it.
Please. Thinking Cap is produced by Sally Tucker. Music by Kyle Epstein and Jacob Buchanan. Graphics by Matt Ingram. For more, find us at Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and at AmericanProgress.org, or wherever you want.
Did you get picked on in high school?
I actually did not. Oh, yeah, wait, did I talk about that? Yeah, I read newspapers in gym class. People were just kind of intimidated by me.
Why?
Because I think I was serious.
Okay.
I read the newspaper.
Yeah. You were Russian.
I was Russian. Yeah. But I know, I maybe like once or twice, but never in any kind of serious
Okay,
way.
that's good.
Yeah. No, I was lucky.